Elias's head decomposed into butterflies amidst discordant music boxes. Not a single wing beat, but 1,000 tiny fluttering funshushusa, as the delicate forms dissolved from his skull, leaving only a smear of iridescent dust on the damp concrete. The music box's tiny tarnished brass things played Tivin Dixie backwards, the melody a distorted, tinny shriek crawling through a rusted can, each note scraping like broken glass on stone. I stumbled back, my rational mind screaming sui optical illusion, decomposition gas, hallucination dye. But the smell hit me first, singed feathers thick and acrid, clogging my throat. My forearm prickled, icy fingers tracing a jagged, impossible pattern, 3 spirals, a slash right through my jacket. Not cold, not real, but it's happening. I forced my legs to move away from the monolith space where Elias's remains had been towards the deeper chamber. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of dust and something older, like dried roses left in a tomb. Dusty rose wallpaper, peeling in long brittle strips, clung to the walls. Faded lavender paint, chipped and stained, bled into the grime. My boots crunched on grit shards of broken pottery, maybe Bronze Age shards or something else entirely. The backwoods lullaby echoed from the darkness ahead. A child's voice warped, singing sleep now, the night is long, in reverse, each syllable twisting my stomach into knots. It's the wind, the pipes, the echo. I told myself the mantra brittle against the sensory assault, to just sound, just memory. I rounded a corner into the chamber. The air here was still, smelling of burnt hair now, beneath the singed feathers. The walls were lined with etched symbols, glowing faintly with a sickly phosphorescent light that pulsed in time with the music box's discordant fushush, shush. Each symbol mirrored the intricate, impossible pattern I'd seen on Elias's skeletal hand, a pattern I dismissed as decay. My breath hitched. Foundation, connection. The rational part of me, the part that solved missing persons cases, screamed for coincidence, stress, induced hallucination. But the icy tracings on my arm, the smell of burnt hair clinging to the air, the foreign wrongness of the lullaby, it was eroding the foundation of my skepticism, like acid on stone. I reached out, fingers trembling to touch a symbol. The moment my skin brushed the cold stone, the music box sound cut off abruptly. Silence, thick and suffocating. Then, from the utter blackness beyond the chamber's entrance, a single perfect feather drifted down. It landed on my open palm with a sound like a sigh. It smelled of burnt hair, searingly hot and acrid. The backwoods lullaby shifted, the warped melody dissolving into a raw, wet, choked sob, ragged and childlike, echoing from the very walls themselves. The feather's edge, sharp as bone, pricked my skin. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The sob echoed again, closer this time, and the icy tracings on my arm flared hot, then cold, then hot, tracing the symbols on the wall. The feather lay on my palm, smelling of burnt hair as the child's choked sob filled the chamber, relentless. The feather lay heavy on my palm, a brand searing into my skin. The choked sob clung to the chamber's stone, a phantom limb pressing against my ribs. I forced myself to breathe, the air thick enough to choke on. It's a trick, a delusion. The pressure, the isolation. My mind clawed for purchase on something solid, something rational, but the icy tracings on my arm pulsed, mimicking the glyphs etched into the walls. They weren't just glowing now, they seemed to twine breathe, a slow, sickening expansion and contraction. I stumbled back, my boots scraping against the grit, my gaze locked onto the far end of the chamber where a new passage yawned into the darkness. It wasn't there before, or maybe it was, and my mind had simply refused to acknowledge it. A small structure sat within the passage's mouth, a dollhouse carved from something black and glassy. Obsidian, maybe. It was unsettlingly perfect, miniature, and yet radiating a palpable wrongness. The backwards lullaby swelled, a discordant wave washing over me. It wasn't just echoing now, it seemed to be emanating from the dollhouse itself. A child's voice, brittle and strained, whispered through the warped melody. Disease, spreading. Rot. The words slithered into my ears, bypassing my rational defenses. I approached cautiously, each step a monumental effort. The dollhouse replicated my office, not a recreation, but a precise, unsettling duplicate. The miniature desk, the ink-stained ledger, the worn leather chair, all rendered in painstaking detail. Each room held a symbol, identical to those etched on the walls, glowing with the same sickly phosphorescence. My gut twisted. It's mocking me. I peered into the miniature nursery. A tiny crib stood in the center of the room, draped with a minuscule, faded lavender blanket. The lullaby intensified, a frantic, desperate plea. Sleep now, little one. The rot spreads. My arm burned. the symbols blooming into livid bruises beneath my skin. Then I saw it. A movement, a flicker of shadow in the foyer of the dollhouse. I whipped around, heart hammering against my ribs. The cat. It wasn't a shadow, wasn't a trick of the light. It was somebody the right, a grotesque amalgamation of disparate feline remains. A tabby's tail twitching with unsettling precision, a Siamese's eyes, cold and predatory, locked onto my wrist. A Persian's spine arching in a parody of feline grace. The smell hit me then. Not just the singed feathers, but something else. Something acrid and antiseptic, like a hospital room filled with decay. Paralyzing dread slammed into me, a physical force pinning me to the spot. I tried to move, to run, but my limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. The cat padded forward, its movements fluid and silent despite the unnatural construction of its body. The lullaby warped again, accelerating into a frantic, hysterical pitch. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help, to report what I was seeing. My fingers trembled so violently I could barely grip the device. I managed to bring up the dial pad, my thumb hovering over the emergency contact button. The cat's tail flicked, a wet, sickening forchi. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the stone floor, the screen going black. The lullaby reached a fever pitch, a chaotic jumble of warped melodies and whispered threats. My vision swam, the chamber blurring around the edges. The symbols on the walls pulsed faster, burning into my retinas. The cat's eyes fixed on my wrist, and the icy tracings on my arm flared hot, then cold, then hot again, a rhythmic pulse of agony. The fall was slow, agonizingly slow. Not a plummet, but a viscous descent through something thick and clinging. The blackness pressed against my eyelids, a suffocating velvet. The stone floor rushed up, then receded, then rushed up again. My stomach lurched, a cold knot of nausea tightening with each distorted cycle. The pocket watch. I'd snatched it from the desk in the miniature office, a desperate act, a futile attempt to find control, something now. It was controlling me. Each tick wasn't a measure of time, it was a hammer blow against my skull. Tick. The stringed instruments began, a discordant scraping that resonated deep within my bones. It wasn't music, it was the sound of something ancient and broken being dragged across glass. Tick. My reflection in the polished stone shimmered, fractured. I watched, horrified. As the edges softened, blurred, my skin seemed to dissolve, blooming into a swarm of dust-colored butterflies that fluttered away, leaving behind only a hollow mockery of my face. The corridor looped again. And again, each repetition a fresh wave of nausea, a fresh surge of dread. The walls, the grit beneath my boots, the sickly glow of the glyphs Sinde, all the same yet subtly wrong. I fought the urge to scream, clamping my jaw shut, tasting the metallic tang of fear. It is a trick, a delusion, but the icy tracings on my arm pulsed, a frantic rhythm mirroring the grinding of the watch's gears. They weren't just bruising now, they were shifting, rearranging themselves into something unfamiliar. My gaze snagged on the dollhouse. It was still there. A perfect miniature replica of my life, mocking me with its meticulous detail. I forced myself to look away, to focus on the passage ahead, on the faint glimmer of light that promised. What? Escape? Or merely another loop? Then I saw the nursery window. It wasn't the same as before. The lavender blanket still draped the crib. The miniature rocking chair still swayed gently, but the room was different. I stumbled forward, drawn by a morbid curiosity. Pressed against the glass, I saw him. Elias, my partner. His face, pale and slack, his eyes vacant and staring. A single crimson stain bloomed on his pristine white shirt. A strangled sob escaped my lips. No, it's not real. But the air grew heavy, suffocating. The backwards lullaby swelled, a distorted chorus of childhood innocence corrupted. And then, impossibly, I heard my own voice woven into the warped melody. A desperate pleading whisper, "Help me, please, it's not real." The watch's gears ground louder, a mechanical scream tearing through the silence. The symbols on my arm burned, a searing brand against my skin. I felt a compulsion, an irresistible urge to move forward, deeper into the monolith's core. Each heartbeat echoed the watch's ticking, each pulse a frantic plea. Don't go, but my legs moved of their own accord, carrying me toward the darkness. The stringed instruments intensified, a cacophony of despair. The walls seemed to close in, pressing against my ribs. The scent of singed feathers became overpowering, a cloying sweetness that choked the air. I raised my hand, staring at the watch nestled against my wrist. It was no longer metal and glass, it was fusing, merging, becoming one with my flesh. The gears whirred, a final, agonizing groan. The watch's face began to melt, the numbers dissolving into a viscous black ooze. It flowed down my arm, seeping into my skin, consuming me. I watched, helpless, as my own hands began to decompose, the flesh softening, crumbling, transforming into a swarm of those same dust-colored butterflies. They swarmed around my face, obscuring my vision, filling my lungs. The lullaby reached a fever pitch, a chaotic symphony of madness. The last thing I saw reflected in the dissolving watch face was my own face to my, a mask of terror, slowly disintegrating into a cloud of butterflies. The symbols weren't just on my skin, they were seed. I pressed my fingertips against the icy tracings, half expecting the flesh to part like rotten fruit. But no, the skin held firm taut. Yet beneath, something twin shifted, a slow, rhythmic pulse, as if a foreign current were flowing through my veins. The air thickened, pressing against my throat like a damp rag. Singed feathers, walways, singed feathers, clogged my nostrils, metallic and acrid. The whispers slithered through the cracks in the walls, a chorus of children's voices, their words backward, jagged, Yohor foisite dnids cpad. The sickness spreads through. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound seeped through my bones, vibrating in my molars. The dollhouse loomed ahead, its miniature kitchen now a charnel scene. The lavender curtains were drawn, but through the thin fabric I saw it, a tiny corpse sprawled across the table, its porcelain limbs splayed in a grotesque parody of sleep. The doll's face was split open, its mouth stretched too wide, too many teeth glistening in the sickly glow. My breath hitched, fear not possible. But the symbols on my arm pulsed, a frantic, irregular heartbeat. I reached for the miniature corpse, my fingers hovering just above the surface. The doll's glassy eyes followed me, unblinking. Then, cracker, a single bone snapped, the sound so delicate it might have been a child's voice breaking. The doll's head lolled back, its neck bent at an unnatural angle, and I recoiled as if struck. The archives. The medical texts, they had to be here somewhere in this endless labyrinth of concrete and rust. There had to be an answer. My boots echoed against the stone, each step a deliberate, measured thud. The shelves stretched endlessly, their surfaces dusted with a fine pinkish film like powdered roses ground to ash. My fingers traced the spines of the tomes, their leather bindings cracked and brittle, fibron's age, plagues, cures. Wheat. Nothing. Then, their volume bound in tarnished brass, its edges singed as if rescued from a fire. I pulled it free, the hinge of the shelf groaning like a dying animal. The pages were yellowed, the script a spidery, angular handwriting, ink faded to the color of old bruises. The words blurred at first, my vision swimming in dusty rows. I blinked, and the letters sharpened, forming sentences that coiled around my skull like serpents. The marked see what is not. The sick become the map. The disease is not in the body, it is the body. My stomach lurched, the symbols on my arm burned, a slow creeping heat. I traced them with my thumb, feeling the texture of my own skin. No, not my skin. Something deeper, something wrong. The text went on, describing a condition where the afflicted perceived their decay as a living, breathing entity, a specter that fed on their doubt. They watch as their flesh rots, as their veins become rivers of black. They hear the whispers of those who came before, who also saw, who also tried to run. The page trembled in my grip. The whispers sharpened, no longer backward, but clear, mocking. You see it too, don't you, Theodore? The truth is in your veins. I pressed my palm against the wall, the concrete cooled beneath my fingers. The reflection in the puddle at my feet was wrong. My eyes were weeping blood, thick and slow like syrup. I stumbled back, but the lullaby stopped abruptly. The silence that followed worse than the song itself. The symbols on my arm twisted, the icy tracings now a writhing mass of veins, black and pulsing. The dollhouse's kitchen door creaked open, the miniature corpse's head turning toward me, its glassy eyes reflecting the dusty rose glow. And then from the darkness beyond, something twin-moved. Not a whisper this time, not a bone cracking. A sound like a blade dragging across bone, slow and deliberate. The lullaby began again, but this time, it wasn't backward. It was subid waiting. The symbols burned not with fire but with the slow, creeping certainty of a brand pressed into flesh. My fingers twitched, nails digging into my palms hard enough to draw blood. No, not blooder. Something darker, something taunton, like oil mixed with rust. The tunnel yawned ahead, its walls slick with the same dusty rose patina, the air heavy with the scent of singed feathers, and something older, something medicinal. The whispers coiled around my ankles, a chorus of children's voices, their lullaby still backward, still jagged, drasap cpad, woifi site DNAs. The sickness spreading through you. I swallowed, but my throat was dry, my tongue a rough patch of sandpaper. The cymbals pulsed, a slow, rhythmic throb beneath my skin like a second heartbeat. My breath came in shallow gasps, each inhale dragging the metallic tang of old coins through my lungs. The walls groaned not from the weight of the monolith above, but from something fondy alive. The steel exhaled, a wet, rattling sigh, as if the very structure were holding its breath. I stepped forward, boots crunching on grit that bit into the soles like tiny teeth. The lavender dust clung to my socks, thick and cloying, tasting of mint and something foot-rotten, like the inside of a bruise. The music box notes skipped, a single discordant plink, then silence. The absence was worse. The children's voices faded, leaving only the sound of my own pulse, the cymbals' pulse, the monolith's slow, wet breathing. The tunnel twisted, the walls pressing closer, the air thick enough to choke on. My fingers traced the symbols again, feeling the raised lines like braille, like a map written in pain. Follow the path, the truth is in the veins. The chamber loomed, its entrance framed by rusted arches that sagged under the weight of centuries. The air inside shimmered, dust motes suspended in a beam of sickly rose light, swirling like trapped souls. The floor was slick, the surface glistening with something that wasn't water. No, not water, something twenty, something thicker, something that clung to my boots like syrup. I stepped forward, the soles of my feet sticking, the cymbals on my arm tightening like a tourniquet. The whispers returned, softer now, but clearer, the lullaby still backward, still wrong, footnade cpad ortify sight. The cat was there, not the thing from before. This was different. A patchwork of fur and bone, its body stitched together from the remains of a dozen felines, its ribs showing through ragged fur like the bars of a cage. Its eyes God, its eyes were hollow pits, black and endless, reflecting nothing. It moved in jerks, its limbs too long, its joints bending the wrong way, the sound of its movement a wet the squelchy, like meat hitting stone. In its mouth it dragged a severed communication device. The wires frayed, the plastic cracked. The radio's casing was split open, the insides exposed like a gutted fish. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cat's fur. No, not fur. Something treer, something like old parchment. The cat hissed, a sound like a blade being dragged across glass, its lips peeling back from too many teeth. The symbols on my arm screamed, a pulse of ice and fire, and I jerked my hand back. The cat didn't attack. It didn't need to. It dropped the device at my feet, the wires trailing like entrails, and turned its hollow gaze on me. The drain cover was there, a rusted circle set into the floor, the edges jagged. The cat's tail twitched, the tip splitting open like a flower, tendrils of something black and glistening unfurling. It pressed its paw against the cover, the metal groaning, the sound like a dying man's breath. The whispers sharpened, the lullaby no longer backward, no longer a song but a chant. Tudnada cpad woifi sight, DNA's cpad woifi sight. The cat slammed the cover shut. The thud echoed, the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. The dust rose in a slow churning cloud, thick and rose-colored, filling my lungs, clogging my throat. The symbols on my arm swinburned, the ice turning to fire, the fire turning to fringe pressure, a weight pressing against my chest, against my ribs, against my skin. I tried to scream, but my mouth was full of dust, of feathers, of for-nothing. The cat's voice was the last thing I heard before the darkness took me. A single, wet tufa click. The drain cover was sealed. The lullaby was a chant. The sickness spreads free through you, and I was drowning in it. The chamber was a cage of symbols, their edges biting into the air like serrated teeth. I pressed my palm against the cold steel wall. The symbols bit back their raised lines, drawing bloodless lines along my skin. Not quite ink, not quite rust. Something in between, something alive. The scent of singed feathers clogged my throat again, thick and metallic, like the inside of a slaughterhouse. My breath fogged in the damp air, each exhale a ghost of my own making. The construct stood at the center, its body a tangle of rusted wire and bone, limbs too long, joints bending the wrong way. The sound of its movement a wet fin creak, like a coffin hinge in need of oil. Its head was a patchwork of skull fragments, stitched together with something dark and glistening. Its mouth a jagged slit where teeth should not have been. When it spoke, the words came in reverse, a child's laughter unspooled backward, the sound of a tape rewinding too fast. Ria shokanirts teraniel to mishnir, ganirats yul of sight. I lunged. The pipe was cold in my hand, the metal slick with something wet. I swung thud. The construct's chest caved in, wire snapping like a whip, the sound a distorted foot crack, like film rewinding. But the wire didn't stay broken. It unbroke, the pieces reversing their path, slithering back into the construct's flesh, the symbols on my arm screaming as they embedded themselves into my palm. The pain was a white-hot brand, the scent of burning hair filling my nose. I gasped, the pipe slipping from my fingers, and the construct's head turned slow, deliberate, the sound of rusted hinges. Its eyes were hollow but not empty. Inside the blackness I saw Foodie, the cat's endless, hollow pits, staring out from the wrong places, the wrong angles. The lullaby twisted, the backward song now a scream, the words warping into something wet and guttural. Ah, nerds. Terni elpamishner, nirats ilaf sight. I stumbled back, my boots slipping on the slick floor. The puddle reflected me, not my face, but the constructs, the wire and bone and hollow eyes staring up from the water. The symbols on my arm pulsed, the pain spreading like ink in water, the sensation of icy fingers tracing my veins. The construct moved, its limbs jerking, the sound of rusted wire tearing Tevin backward. The symbols on my skin screaming as they were forced deeper, deeper, until my entire arm was a map of raised lines. A cage of pain. The cat's voice was the last thing I heard before the darkness took me. A single, wet, twint click. The construct's eyes blinked once, twice, and the cat's hollow gaze stared out from within the wire and bone. The lullaby was a scream. The symbols burned. The sickness spread through me, and I was drowning in it. The construct's limbs unfolded, like a surgeon's scalpel, too precise, too purposeful, its fingers elongating into needles of rusted wire, the joints bending in the wrong direction. The sound a wet thwentfit squelch, like a corpse's spine being forced back into place. The stringed instruments behind me screamed, the resonance of their shattering vibrating through my teeth, the air thick with the scent of singed feathers and something fond chemical, like the inside of a laboratory where they dissected the wrong thing. The symbols on my arms swin burned, the lines deepening, the sensation of icy fingers tracing my veins again. But this time the cold wasn't just on my skin. It was swinted inside me, spreading like ink in water, the neural pathways of my own mind, free-mapping themselves onto the construct's movements. Asterisk it knows, asterisk I thought, the words clawing up my throat. Asterisk it is not just mimicking me. It's a learning me. Asterisk the construct's head tilted, the wire and bone creaking like a door left ajar in a storm, the hollow eyes flickering, not with life, but with Foodie tighter, the cat's gaze reflected in the blackness, the pupils dilating into spirals, into neuron scene into the tangled mess of my own brain. The lullaby reversed itself again, the backward song now a diagnostic, the words warping into something clinical, something twin medical, asterisk, nusa sight. Nirats yeluf sight, nerts terne, eltmisner, nirats yeluf sight. Asterisk I stumbled back, my boots slipping on the slick floor, the puddle reflecting not my face, but the twin construct 2020 struct, so the wire and bone and hollow eyes staring up from the water. The symbols on my arm frin pulsing, in time with its movements. The dollhouse in the corner frin twitched, the nursery walls are shuddering, like a living thing, the miniature figures inside the melting twinned, their faces stretching, their limbs elongating into the wrong shapes. The stringed instruments behind me screaming louder, the sound of their strings snapping one by one, the resonance vibrating through my skull, asterisk. It's not a dollhouse. Asterisk I realized, the thought a blade to my gut. Asterisk it's a model. Fuchsia for me. A future map of my mind. Asterisk the symbols on my arms seen burned hotter, the sensation of icy fingers seen digging deeper, the neural pathways seen flaring like a circuit overload, the construct's movement sintinging, with the Emery Scanty in the dollhouse nursery, the live feed of my own brain unfolding like a surgical incision. The blueprint on the wall glowed fud, the ink shifting from medical notations to fun diagnostic codes, the stringed instruments behind me shattering. Like glass, the sound of their pieces raining, down like a storm of needles. Asterisk you, not haunting me. Asterisk I whispered, the words raw, the construct's head turning toward me, the wire and bone for clicking, like a surgeon's tools being set down. The hollow eyes focusing on my reflection in the puddle. The reflect. Chunten tearing itself apart. The dollhouse suntrend shattering like a mirror. The nursery walls sun unfolding into a 3D map of my neural pathways. The stringed instruments behind me screaming as the last note snapped. The sound of my own mind breaking. The symbols on my arms swinburned like a brand. The sensation of icy fingers digging deeper. The construct S movement syncing with the Fuinri, scanty with a shattered dollhouse. The live feed of my own brain unfolding like a surgical incision. And the CAT'S hollow gaze stared out from the wrong places, the wrong angles, the wrong fun time. The radio sputtered, a final, pathetic wheeze of static before dying completely. Not a clean break, but a drawn-out agonizing expiration. A child's giggle, high and brittle, echoed from the unseen corners of the monolith. It wasn't a sound of mirth. It was a measurement, a confirmation. Another system compromised. The air already thick with the scent of singed feathers, a smell that clung to the back of my throat like ash, seemed to intensify, coating my tongue with a bitter metallic tang. I lunged for the radio, fingers fumbling with the cold, unresponsive buttons. Useless. All of them were useless. The phone had died hours ago. The emergency beacon a useless brick. Each failure was accompanied by that sound, a child's giggle, morphing into something sharper, more diagnostic. It felt like the monolith itself was laughing. My wrist monitor, the last vestige of external communication, flatlined. The display flashed red, a frantic pulse of warning against the dusty rose that was beginning to bleed into my vision. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the encroaching stillness. The lavender shadows deepened, blurring the edges of the concrete walls, making them seem to shubreathed. I spun around, searching for the source of the sound, the source of the mockery. The cat was there, of course, always there. Assembled from disparate feline remains, it sat perched on a pile of discarded cables, its eyes glowing like emergency lights, twin beacons of malevolent amusement. It didn't stalk, didn't prowl. It simply tritely observed, a silent, calculating predator. It was dragging something. My signal flared toward a rusted grate embedded in the floor. The metal scraped against the concrete, a harsh, grating sound that resonated deep within my bones. The flare, my last hope of summoning help, disappeared into the darkness with a final metallic fickling tune. No, I rasped, the word catching in my throat. Stop that. The cat's head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement that felt like a deliberate insult. Its eyes didn't blink. They just watched, absorbing my fear, feeding on my desperation. The giggle returned, louder this time, layered with a static hiss that seemed to crawl into my ears. It wasn't just a giggle anymore. It was a scream, warped and distorted, a child's innocence twisted into something monstrous. My vision swam, the dusty rose intensifying, blurring the lines between the monolith and my own skin. It felt as if the walls were closing in, pressing against me, suffocating me. The lavender shadows danced, morphing into grotesque shapes, faces, limbs, things I couldn't quite define. My thoughts, once sharp and logical, fractured into shards of paranoia, they're mocking me. They're all laughing. The symbols on my arm pulsed, a painful throb beneath the skin, the icy fingers tracing their patterns, not just on my arm but across my mind. The construct, it was watching me through the cat. It was learning. It was becoming me. I stumbled backward, my boots scraping against the concrete floor, the sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The air grew colder, the scent of singed feathers almost unbearable. I reached for my headlamp, my fingers fumbling with the switch. Click, nothing. Click, still nothing. The cat's tail flicked, a slow, deliberate movement that extinguished the last vestige of light. The world plunged into absolute darkness. The giggling swelled, a cacophony of distorted sound that threatened to shatter my sanity. A wave of nausea washed over me, the metallic tang in my mouth intensifying. Then, silence. A profound, suffocating silence, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I stood there, suspended in the blackness, utterly alone, utterly helpless. The last thing I registered was the sensation of something cold and wet brushing against my ankle. The cat undoubtedly, before the darkness consumed me entirely. The pipe was a relic cold, jagged, and heavier than it had any right to be. My fingers wrapped around its rusted circumference, the metal biting into my palms like teeth. The symbols on the walls weren't just twin pulsing anymore. They were swin breathing, expanding and contracting in sickly lavender veins that slithered across the concrete. Each one screamed at me, a silent accusation of my failure, my weakness. You're already infected, you always were. The air reeked of singed feathers now thick and cloying, pressing against my throat until I gagged. I charged. The cat was there, of course, but this time it wasn't alone. Dozens, no hundreds see. Of them emerged from the shadows, their patched together bodies twitching in unison, eyes glowing like embers in the dark. They didn't hiss, they didn't snarl. They sung. The lullaby, once backwards and broken, now poured from their throats in a distorted forward rush. A child's voice stretched thin, warped into a scream of progressy, of inevitability. The notes scraped against my skull, nails on glass, and I staggered, my vision swimming with the symbols, with the lavender bleeding from every surface. This isn't real. I roared, though the words tasted hollow. The pipe swung in a wild arc, but the first cat passed through it like mist. The others followed, their forms flickering between solid and smoke. I lunged again, this time driving the pipe into the wall. It sank into the concrete with a wet twitch schlick, but the symbols only writhed harder, laughing at my futility. The dollhouse window flickered to life, my office empty, the desk untouched. The chair sat precisely where it should, the coffee cup cold and untouched. No signs of struggle, no blood, no toimai. Just the quiet hum of a fan, the distant fiff and click of a computer waking from sleep. My breath hitched. It's not real, none of it. Further, the realization should have been liberating. Instead, it was a blade twisted deeper. The cat constructs advanced, their movements synchronized, their voices overlapping in a chorus of mockery. The lullaby became a scream, a wail of something forty becoming, something spreading. The symbols on my arm pulsed in time with the singing, the icy fingers tracing their paths now not just on my skin, but to inside me, carving their way into my veins. I could feel them. Them spreading, consuming. My body was a map, and they were the infection. I dropped to my knees, the pipe clattering beside me. The symbols on the walls pulsed faster, their lavender glow seeping into my clothes, staining my skin. The cat construct circled, their eyes burning brighter, their song growing louder, more insistent. The dollhouse window darkened, the office swallowed by black. The lullaby screamed forward, a sound that wasn't sound at all but 20 pressure, a force pressing against my ribs, my lungs, my full mind in no. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the singing. The symbols on my arm burned, the icy fingers digging deeper. I could feel the construct forming within me, the cat's eyes in my own skull, the lullaby in my throat. I was becoming it. I was Sivati vessel. I grabbed the pipe again, my hands trembling. The symbols on the walls pulsed in time with my heartbeat, their lavender light casting long, distorted shadows. The cat constructs closed in, their song a relentless chant of transformation. I drove the pipe into my chest. It passed through me like I was made of smoke. The symbols on my skin flared, the icy fingers retreating, the lullaby cutting off mid-note. The cat constructs froze, their eyes wide, their mouths open in silent screams. The dollhouse window flickered back to life, my office empty, untouched. The symbols on the walls faded, the lavender staining my clothes, my skin, my so-soul silence. Then the cat's tail flicked, the pipe lay on the ground, untouched. The symbols on my arm were gone. The lullaby had stopped, and I realized I was still inside. The hospital sheet rasped against my cheek, the texture like dried blood. Dusty rose stains bloomed across the starched white fabric, bleeding from the corners where my fingers had clawed. The air still carried that cloying scent of singed feathers, thick enough to choke on, though the sterile antiseptic of the room fought it. A single music box ticked in the corner, tick-tick-tick, its rhythm perfectly syncing with the frantic thud of my own pulse beneath my ribs, tick-tick-thud. Thud-tick-thud. The sound pressed into my skull, a metronome for the unraveling. A man in a white coat stood over me, his face a blur of clinical detachment. "Theodore Rutherford," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the dread I'd felt in the chamber. "You've been here for 3 days. You were found in the abandoned subway tunnels, covered in residue." He gestured vaguely at my arms. "Blood, but not yours. The dollhouse you described, it was a diagnostic model, Elias Vance's model. He suffered from disease phantasmagoria." Disease phantasmagoria. The words echoed, hollow. The same condition. Elias. The name meant nothing to me before, but now it was a cold stone in my gut. The symbols weren't spreading from the walls. They were Sibinzit. The lavender veins weren't on the concrete, they were fompimi veins pulsing with the music box's rhythm, tick-thud, tick-thud, thud. The scent of feathers intensified, mixed now with the metallic tang of blood from the claw marks on my own arms. I tried to move, to argue, but my hands were heavy, leaden. I looked down. The skin on my knuckles was dissolving, not bleeding, not tearing. It was Kentwide unraveling, like old lace, revealing the faint, translucent shimmer beneath. Tiny, perfect wings, no larger than my fingernail, began to form from the dissolving flesh. They fluttered, a silent vibration against the hospital sheet, catching the weak light. Thud. Tick, thud. The music box was louder now, filling the room, its melody warped but clear forward. Your condition, the doctor continued, his eyes scanning a chart, causes the brain to perceive illness as spectral vectors. The cats, the symbols, the dollhouse. They weren't real. They were your mind's attempt to map the foodie spread of the disease, the cat. It was your own terror manifesting to sabotage your escape, to make you see the infection. My terror. The words were a knife. The cat constructs weren't invaders. They were sealed by me, the fear made flesh. The lullaby wasn't a warning from the void. It was the sound of my own brain screaming Photosutha. The symbols on my skin weren't carving into me. They were sealed by me, neural pathways lighting up. The map of my own unraveling. The lavender stain wasn't on the wall. It was the color of my failing blood. My hands were almost gone. The dissolving flesh was now a swirling cloud of iridescent dust, coalescing into more butterflies. They drifted upwards, silent, against the sterile white ceiling. The music box ticked on, tick, 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 a relentless countdown. The doctor turned his head, his expression unchanged, clinical. The disease is Binyo, Theodore. The words hit like a physical blow, not caused by the disease. The lullaby, no longer backwards, no longer broken, played forward in the room, a single, clear, impossible note that wasn't a note at all. But the sound of my own bones dissolving. The butterflies swirled, forming a silent final shape against the ceiling before vanishing. The music box stopped. The only sound was the footy ticket of my own fading heartbeat, the last echo of the lullaby playing forward inside the silence.